All right, here we are, looking at the second half of part two of Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, starting with chapter 6 called Miracle Metal. Starts with a scene of Wesley Mooch bringing the comrades together. What was your first impression of the whole meeting?
So this was the communist inner circle of highly influential government and industrial leaders. We saw the head of the labor union, James Taggart, the head of the transcontinental train system, some senators and other key parties here, and they were at a point now where their country is just going to ruin, and they're whining and complaining and squirming because people aren't doing what they need them to do. Businesses are disappearing. Leaders of industry and able-bodied, smart-minded individuals are deserting the country, and it's time for them to ramp up their emergency protocols and put into place a series of directives that will essentially just kind of get over that last little ascent on this climb towards a communist dictatorship. And it was intense. It was really well worded, and it was very contorted, and I didn't enjoy reading it. I respected reading it, I think I would say, because of course if something like this were to happen, it would make me sick. And I think Ayn Rand's ability to capture the extremities and extremes, I should say, that these people are willing to go to try and force their way and get what they want into happening. And of course, it doesn't work out very well, but we'll get to that later. I think it was very interesting.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It wasn't really an enjoyable thing to read, but it was interesting and realistic. It demanded an emotional response from the reader.
Yeah, and so this is because of course Atlas Shrugged is a very widely referenced piece of literature. The Rush music group put out an album that is completely inspired by the works of Ayn Rand, 2112.
Yes.
And in the US presidential race a few years ago, we saw a sort of weird outlier news group kind of gain some attention by the name of Breitbart that represents the far right. They actually specifically reference Atlas Shrugged and this chapter specifically, Directive 10-289, and compare it to Obamacare when bashing the leftist government sort of policies. And so this is really, we're in the meat and potatoes of Atlas Shrugged and talking about Orwellian references. This is one of the big ones. Directive 10-289 has gotten a lot of traction over the past 50 years. People keep coming back to Ayn Rand's writing because she makes some hard-hitting points and lays it out very easily for us to point and analogize and make metaphors about this communist propaganda and agenda.
Yeah, it's a very good example on the failings and shortcomings and maybe oversight of the socialist doctrine or the communist doctrine. And she really puts it together pretty well in 8 simple rules.
Yeah, so this is the template. This is how you strip a nation of its free will and determinism. This is how you get rid of the common man's desire to do good work and to be productive and gain profits worthy of one's ability. This is how you spell it out. If you ever want to make a communist nation, these are your rules. You want to go point for point? Maybe I'll read the first one. We'll talk about it a bit, then you can read the next one.
Sure.
Okay, so I sum them up because it's very well written, and I think that I can get to the point a bit quicker without taking away the experience from the potential readers. But point 1 is all workers, wage earners, and employees of any kind are bound to their jobs and shall not leave or be dismissed, nor change employment under penalty of term in jail. So
And
step one,
that's really attacking a symptom rather than the problem.
exactly. And that is a great way to put it, because that is what this communist agenda and what communist agendas try to do. They say, well, we could be more productive if everybody did their job and everybody had to do their job and the best people did the best jobs and we all supported everyone. But the reality ends up being that no one wants to do it if they have to.
Yeah.
And I think in later chapters, we really get an insight into how this psychology of communism impacts like the macroeconomics of a country, of a nation, and how you, by simply twisting and contorting the way a society ought to function and mandating that it must function at peak efficiency, you very quickly see it doesn't work that way. You don't get good people to do great work because they have to. And in fact, they are relied upon by way of the fact that there's more people who need them to make good work than there are people wanting to make good work, and there just isn't enough productivity to go around. And when the smartest man has to work double shifts every day, he very quickly disappears.
Yeah, and not only that, it takes your smartest man, locks him in right where he is. So if you have the man with the potential to be running the country, you have him stuck in the same job that he's been doing since he was 16 years old, of just washing the side of a train or something.
Yeah, and so it's from each based on their ability to each based on their need, I think is the phrase.
Yeah, from each according to their ability, and to each according to their need.
And what happens is we find out that it really isn't a system of, okay, how great can I work, but more, how great can I make my need appear to be? And how can I get the system to work for me so that I don't have to be the spectacular person I never was born to be, but that I can get my stipends and my alms and be able to support my family and have a turkey for Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. And part 2 of the directive is pretty similar to the first one, just pertaining to the owners more. It says, all industrial, commercial, and manufacturing businesses and establishments of any nature has to stay in operation, and the owners can't quit or leave or retire or close or transfer their businesses to anybody under penalty of the law.
Under penalty of nationalization of their establishment and the seizure of any and all of their property.
Yeah.
And so this is, again, so we're saying, you've got a great industry. You're not allowed to leave. You need to make good product for the nation. It is your welfare moral directive that we are mandating. And if you leave, we will take everything you have and we'll run it just as well as you did, because it doesn't take a smart man to run a successful industry. It just takes men to run a successful industry.
Yeah. And the first thing I thought of when I read that directive was, if that was in place at the start of this book, we never would have gotten Reardon Metal, because it came out of a revolution of industry. Like he would have been bound to just keep making steel, but he had a better idea, started manufacturing this new type of metal called Reardon Metal, and later changed his Miracle Metal.
Mm-hmm.
And it never would have existed if this kind of restriction was in place that they think is going to save the country.
And it's interesting because we've seen this mentality come up every 50 years or so, maybe even in a tighter period of time than that. But we get to this place where people think, okay, we've done enough. We've created and invented enough. Let's just really kick ass. Let's pull our socks up and get everybody into the factories. We'll all produce everything we need and we'll be a superpower, and we'll be able to make the world a better place, feed the starving and home the homeless, and we'll put the burden of the world on our backs and be able to move forward. But that's really not how it works when you shut down innovation and you stop people from being able to expand and create more efficient systems. If we had stopped doing what we've been doing for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, we wouldn't have the pyramids, we wouldn't have alloys, we wouldn't have the internet, we wouldn't have all of these things that were inconceivably more effective than the systems we thought that were once were perfect. And that's really interesting, that people think that if we could just produce everything that's great right now at such a scale that everyone could have it, the whole race would just leap into the future, instead of realizing and accepting that no, the race is leaping into the future because of the innovations we've come up with. And the whole notion that, oh, there's more poverty, there's more homelessness now than ever. I was like, no, the bubble's bigger for those things. The population's bigger and can sustain those things because of where we're at. If you took all of the homeless people and all of the starving people in the world right now and you dropped them off in the 1600s, it wouldn't be able to sustain itself. We have a chaotic system which is perfectly in balance. And you can't just tweak one spoke of a wheel and expect it to be more efficient. In fact, what you see when you remove a spoke from a wheel is the entire collapse of the structure.
Exactly. And I see like the ideology of competition versus cooperation pop up a lot in this book too, where they kind of demonize competitiveness as just an all-out negative trait, and we all need to learn how to cooperate, and that's going to be how the country saves itself. But like you said, it just squashes out innovation.
And that's, you hit on it right there, nail on the head on the nail. I don't know how that phrase works, but competition is often demonized as this destructive device that creates childhood bullies, that fosters a fixed mindset and encourages more people to fail. But what they don't get is what they're saying. And so when you say, oh, well, companies shouldn't compete, they should be able to share the market. We don't need monopolies, we need cooperation. It's like, well, no.
Yeah.
What you need is a better solution. And if your product is better than the current standard, we'll buy it. And it's not about you versus the current standard. No one cares about you and no one cares about the current standard. They don't respect the company. There's no loyalty to brands in capitalism. There is simply what product offers me the best value for the price that they're charging. And as soon as a new innovation comes along that kicks the rug right out of the feet of these monopolies, they're gone. There's no loyalty to brands. There's simply loyalty to efficiency. And efficiency is a product of competition. When you have someone who has a brain and wants to be successful, they will be. They're not in competition with their competition. They're in competition with themselves to produce something worth purchasing.
And that's not to demonize cooperation either. Like you can't lean into either end of the spectrum. Like Socrates would say, it's a mean between the two.
Exactly. Because what happens is, you see, people will do the best they can with the tools they have. And right now, it may seem like things could be way better if the rich people just gave billions of dollars to the masses and distributed it equally and gave everybody the opportunity. But no, the system is balanced. And what's happening is you are getting a humanitarian relief to the degree that is possible. Sure, we could probably push that line a few more percent, but to enforce people to be 100% humanitarian, to strip competition out entirely, it results in zero humanitarian relief. And that's the problem. You can't support other countries if you destroy your own country. Make your bed before you go out into the world.
Yeah.
let's just quickly read the third point and keep talking about this, because the third point is exactly what we're hitting on. All patents and copyrights pertaining to any device, invention, formulas, processes, and works of any nature shall be turned over to the nation as a patriotic emergency gift to the nation. All private trademarks and brands are hereby abolished. And this is so, what we're hearing is the people that have the best product now have no right to their product. Every company that they're in competition with now has access to produce the best things they can with all of their tools and systems they have to do it, so that they can mass produce everything the world needs, in this case the country needs, so that we can move forward as a society. But again, what happens is that's not how you make a factory produce stuff. Just because they have access to the patents doesn't mean they have the men and the minds to do it. And when you take away all of these successes from people who have produced, it becomes very destructive.
Yeah. And you can make just a quick comparison to the book and compare it to real life, just what socialism and all of these distorted laws have done to their society. And then you take a look at the present, and you even just North America, the poor people in North America are the richest poor people in the world. People like to talk about this huge chasm between the rich and the poor in this country is nothing in comparison to the poor of this country and the poor of the third world. So just take that into context.
Well, exactly. You have homeless people who have cell phones, and people will make the argument, well, if you're homeless, why do you have a cell phone? And so, well, hold on, because they have the right to communicate. And this is a piece of technology that everybody has access to. And having a cell phone puts them farther ahead in getting what they need. And it is very helpful. Sure, it's a leisure. You could say, oh, well, you're homeless, you don't deserve to have luxuries, you need to be getting a house. And it's like, well, step your roll back there, millennial. Whose house do you live in?
Yeah. Realistically, you have to think about all the factors too. Like, there's not going to be a single phone company that refuses to give a homeless person a phone, but there's plenty of landlords that would say, hey, I don't want a bum living in my complex.
Yeah. And just touching on this whole notion of copyright law and patents, if you look at Apple, they have produced the best cell phone in the world. Unequivocally, it is the gold standard. Apple products are immaculate. They are perfect. They address a need that they have discovered, and they suit it perfectly. I prefer Android. Obviously, like I'm not a huge fan of Apple, but I don't deny their perfection. And then you go and you hop, skip, and jump across the water over to China, where they don't actually recognize patents of other countries. And you have Android, and you have millions of different types of devices. Millions. There are so many companies. There's so much corruption involved. And without even talking about the corruption in those companies, you can say, look, what is the one greatest Android phone opposite to iPhone that, like, stroke for stroke matches it? And now you can say, well, the Google Pixel, but that's one company again now producing one perfect phone, and there's still millions of options. So if you had one company producing one good thing, and they did it so efficiently that everyone that needed this perfect thing could get it, that's one thing. But if you had a million companies making bastard products of the same thing, like, what a waste of time and resources going in opposite directions, focusing on hardware or software or this specific thing, when if all of them were working together and doing the same thing, they could have a product that was cross-platform and was able to really set the standard higher. But that's not what happens when you get rid of patents. You just have thousands of competition companies doing their best to make a profit and not giving a damn about the product that they're making.
Yeah, and you can realistically scale that back to the metal industry in Atlas Shrugged. Like some people are gonna inherently be able to make better steel than other companies. Like they're gonna be better at metallurgy. They're gonna have more resources, better factories.
Exactly. They're going to be concerned about quality control versus profits. And when
Yeah.
you get to a place where companies can't even employ steady workers for 15 years at a time, when they're dealing with 15-month contract workers who are just concerned in getting their paycheck and don't want to learn what it is that they're doing, they have no investment in the actual company that they're making, they get a cheaper product. And when that cheaper product fails, the
Yeah.
purchasers go somewhere else. And now you say, well, we need you to buy our products. And well, if they need you to buy their products, your products aren't going to do them as well as someone else's products. And if their products don't perform well, it's going to have a ripple effect on the entire economic structure.
Yeah. And like you said, it squashes innovation and it creates a public of people working solely for their paycheck. Which brings us to part 4, which kind of makes itself irrelevant by the rest of these laws, saying no new devices, inventions, products, or goods of any nature whatsoever, not now on the market, shall be produced, invented, manufactured, or sold after the date of this directive. The Office of Patents and Copyrights is hereby suspended. So nobody is going to want to create any patents or invent anything when they know that none of it is going to benefit them. It's just going to go straight to the government or the Science Institute.
And imagine if we had have stopped improving the way we farm 100 years ago, or the way we pour metal 100 years ago. Because this is, and I don't think a lot of people think about that when you say, okay, the Office of Patents and Copyrights is hereby suspended. It's like, okay, so no new iPhones. And it's like, no, you don't get it. Like the clip that holds your bra together is a patent.
Yeah.
Like your shoelaces are a patent. That thing that keeps your shoelace from not fraying every second of the day, that's a patent. You're like everything that you're doing, the way we get radio signals across the world, that's a patent. And if things can't be improved, they will stagnate and deteriorate.
Exactly.
Because now you have, okay, so what you're saying is everything that we have is good enough. All we have to do is keep it in repair. But you're forced to do your job and you don't really want to do the repairs because you just want to get paid and no one's going to check if you do the repairs. So you're just going to say, oh, it's good enough. You're going to use duct tape. You're going to use lubricant if it needs to move, duct tape if it isn't supposed to move. And then what happens is when the actual thing breaks and you are just some random employee and the people that built it have given up on the world because you stripped them of their one purpose, which is to produce, how are you going to rebuild those cell towers?
Yeah. And how many people in the Iron Age thought that that was all they'd ever need before stainless steel became a thing?
Yeah.
And now we have cars because of it.
Exactly. Imagine if we were still just using wrought iron.
We definitely wouldn't be living in the same universe.
So, point 5, every establishment, concern, corporation, or person engaged in production of any nature shall produce as much as they have in the basic year. If they do not, they will be fined for under or overproduction. The basic year is the year in which the directive is put in place, and all future production totals will be measured against that yardstick year.
Yeah. That might be the most twisted of the laws put in place here.
Let me just tie that in with point 6, which is the flip to that, which is every person shall purchase as much as they purchased in the basic year. They will not purchase more and they will not purchase less. Otherwise, they will be fined. So between those two, they're saying that, okay, the companies and the people that are buying and producing, if they can keep producing and buying as much as they are this year, then we will be able to have some stability and be able to make improvements.
Yeah. And like we were saying before, economic growth is just completely out of the picture. We're just looking to survive at this point, and they think this is the best way to do it.
Exactly. Instead of going towards a system that creates abundance, you're saying, let's just stagnate the system. Let's just maintain what we're doing, because what we're doing created this beautiful nation, and this beautiful nation doesn't need to get any more beautiful or abundant. If everybody can just keep producing as much as they have in the past, then, and everyone buys as much as they have, then we'll have enough taxes to go around and be able to deal with all our problems. The issue is all of the smart people have already quit, and you're underproducing, and you have been for 3 years, and your projections have gone down 4 times over, 10 times over, and no one has enough money to do anything, and no company is producing enough, and there's back orders upon back orders, and the system is breaking, and no one can make rails fast enough. No one can make anything fast enough. Grain is rotting in transportation because it can't get across the railroad system because the ties are breaking and there's no metal to replace it.
Back in the days when Hank Rearden was overproducing as much metal as he could, then they were able to make the John Galt line. But at this point, it's making anything like that impossible, especially after the natural disasters that have been rolling across the country.
Exactly. Because what happened was you had capitalists happy with a system and scared of turbulence. And so they stopped Hank Rearden from producing this metal that would revolutionize the world. And they stopped him just long enough to destroy their own system. And so they manufactured a new system where they say, okay, Hank Rearden, give us your patents, give them voluntarily in the form of gift certificate, and allow us to produce what you've made so that we can make this country better. But in the time that it's taken them to do that, you've lost so many factories because they've been abandoned and deserted, and production has gone down, and you run out of men who have any desire to produce it. So now the system's broken because you've waited too long, and you don't have the means to produce the solution because you're not allowed to overproduce.
Yeah, and it's Wesley Mooch is in a position where he says, well, it's Hank's fault that he's not producing enough. If only the government and the Board of Science had control over this, then the country would be fine. It's Hank, he's the problem. He's not making enough for the little guy. If I was in charge, everything would be fine. So I gotta take all the patents for myself and create this authoritarian state where it's entirely top down.
And then we get to point 7, which is all wages, prices, salaries, dividends, profits, interest rates, and forms of income of any form are frozen at their present figures.
Yep. No more raises. No more promotions. Everybody doing the job that they're doing.
Which is insane when you think about something like inflation, that you could not make any more money, that your base wage that you start at is now your salary for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and it seems kind of hypocritical when every single one of the people at this meeting are interjecting and saying, hey, I need more money, I need more. No, the resources belong here, I need the more money.
Yeah, before we put this through, can you raise the prices of this? And can you raise the wages of that?
Like Jim wants to raise the rates for his trains that he's running that are completely empty, wasting money just running trains for the sake of running trains.
There's just no point even, because there's nothing to run anywhere, because towns are collapsing, because over the past few years of this ramping up of communist agenda, they've shut down the ownership of multiple companies. They've stopped people from moving states, and they've crippled businesses all over the board in the attempt to demonopolize people who are making the country that they like.
Mm-hmm.
And the 8th point, of course, really straightforward. We'll just throw this in quickly. All cases arising from and rules not specifically provided for shall be settled by the newly established Unification Board, a board that follows no standard policy, procedure, or laws, and simply based on feeling at the time on a case-by-case basis decrees what will happen.
Whose decision will be final.
Yes. And this was intense. This was like going through this and seeing all of this happen. It was intense. That's the word for it. And I think it was really cool being able to read and experience this world destroying itself, that's imploding of its own agenda.
Yeah, and I just want to read the one line right after all the rules are listed. There was, even within the 4 men who had listened, a remnant of human dignity, which made them sit still and feel sick for the length of 1 minute. So you can tell they still have at least a fraction of a conscience.
Because what's happening is you have men that are talking about the public good and wanting to posture themselves in a way that says they're doing this out of their moral humanitarian ideals, that they have this compass that is perfect. But realistically, what they're saying is, I want more power. I want what the people above me have, and not spending a single second looking down and realizing that there is a mass of people that want what they have. And all of a sudden, you have people climbing all over each other, trying to get a piece of the pie that didn't exist.
Yeah, and they use language like security for the people. That's what they want. They want security, not growth or economic freedom. They want security, and we're going to bring in the age of love instead of the age of competition.
And it is just the most opposite impact. You have the age of hatred and avoiding producing more than your neighbor, because if you produce more, then you're more able, and if you're more able, you have to work more, and if you have to work more, you can work more, and if you can work more, you don't need much, and if you don't need much, you can't get a new suit this year because your less able neighbor, they need to fix their mother's broken hip, so they get the stipend.
Yeah, your ability is completely irrelevant, which just goes against completely human nature. Like we've evolved to hold value in one another based on the content of our character and our working ability, our work ethic, I should say.
Exactly. Like, and you see it in all sorts of mediums, the debate about what a man says and what a man does, and how a man does what a man does, and how that determines who they are. And now you've taken that completely away. It has nothing to do with the degree to which you do it. It's just simply, if you can do it, then you must, and you become a slave to these slave drivers that preach about public good and destroy the public mentality.
Yes, and of course, all of these laws, Directive 10289, all gets put in place on May 1st, May Day.
Which I'm told is, of course, intentional, and a reference to the Haymarket Affair.
It's also known, May 1st is also known as International Workers' Day, to commemorate the fight for the 8-hour work day, the 40-hour work week, and just better labor laws in the United States, which turned into a riot and the Haymarket Affair a few days later.
Yeah, so near the end of the 19th century, we had a lot of factories springing up, business owners owning big concerns, and the development of labor unions. And we still have labor unions, which is an organization of the people that make the products that make the world a better place. They're not the people that invented the product. They're the people that push the buttons and pick up the parts and put them down. There's nothing intelligent to what they do, but it's that there's so many of them doing it that they come together and they move the world forward. They are the motor of industry, and they have representatives that argue for their rights and their fair treatment. And it's a political body. And what happens is, when you have a political body, you have a leader. And when you have a leader, you have power, and ultimate power corrupts ultimately. And when you push too far and you say that the people that are doing the grunt work ought to run the country, it creates a new dynamic where now you're not inventing or innovating, you're just doing your job, and it's all fine and dandy until the gravel comes down and you get sent to work doing your job for the rest of your life with no more progress because you don't need wages, because you're all doing work and you're a family now, and everybody needs to contribute to make the family better and healthy and happy.
Yeah, exactly. And before all these riots, from May Day, like it was not uncommon for people to be working like 16 hours in a day. Wake up, go to work, go to bed. And that was their day for the most of the people. So you could see why they were a bit unhappy about that.
Exactly. Like it's a matter of human rights and being able to have control over your life, being able to work for 8 hours a day, go home, make dinner, spend some time with your loved ones, and enjoy yourself, and be paid enough that you can live a life of pleasure and enjoyment and production and direction. Because there's always going to be more people working grunt jobs than there are people innovating new inventions and pushing the world in a new direction. You can't have a billion Thomas Edisons or Nikola Teslas or Elon Musks, but you'll always have a billion people making their products, shipping light bulbs around the world. But that doesn't mean that they're the ones that ought to make the calls.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of this one South Park episode with Kyle and his dad. His dad was telling him, well, there's two kinds of people in this world. There's gods and there's clods. You see, the clods are the working class, and they get all the on-the-ground stuff done, and the gods are the people like the lawyers and the politicians who run the machine. And then Kyle kind of gets it in his head that, like, oh, let's just get rid of all the clods then. We just have a world of all gods, but it doesn't work that way all the time.
No, exactly. And so
These people you label, the people you label clods have their own value that the people you label gods don't really know about as much.
and so that's the thing, because a lot of people I've seen like to talk about how capitalism is this most elaborate system of imprisonment and slavery, better than what they had in Egypt, and that we're all just being driven by this huge existential prison of life that makes us do what the rich want us to, and that no one can have this life of luxury that the 1% experience. And it's like, well, no, it's more like we're in this happy medium where millions of people are very content doing what they do, and they are exchanging their service to corporations that need them to do what they enjoy doing. And the trade-off is life and value. And if you're willing to do your work and feel respected and valued and be able to stop doing your work and go out and do what you like to do and participate in your hobbies, then you're happy, because this cooperation between company and worker creates the world that we live in. It allows you to go and be entertained and have a life of meaning and observed happiness and existential experience. Whereas if you were a slave, you'd be working 16-hour days, you'd be getting bread and water, and when you were done working, you'd go to your cell and you'd sleep and you'd wake up and you'd keep working. And that's honestly one of the better situations. Realistically, you could be working 20-hour days or 22-hour days, or just driven until you died. And I think where we're at in capitalistic society is a pretty happy medium where you can, if you feel so compelled, make a living for yourself. You can do double shifts. You can save a bunch of money and move up from your station if you so desire. But you have to ask yourself what it is you want from this life and how hard you are willing to get after it.
Exactly. Well said.
And it's not an illusion. If you want to make lots of money, if you want to be really rich, if you want to be in the 1%, guess what? You can be. You have to get after it. But not many people want to be. And in fact, I don't know why many people would, because there's nothing wrong with a simple life and a meditative happiness where you know, okay, this is how big my house needs to be. If I have my stove and my light and my chair and my books, and I can get new books and I can read these books, I can feel happy. If I can volunteer and contribute and give back to society, I will be content. Not many people want these things that they think they want, like a yacht and a mansion and a private jet.
Yeah.
It's not the material products that give you happiness, and the rich people know it. They're very certain they know it, and they are running around being productive and kicking ass and taking names because they enjoy being productive and kicking ass and taking names, not because they want a private jet, not because they want a gold bed. That's just a symptom of the disease of mass production and kick-assery.
Yeah, and if you want to spend some time on that 1% analogy, if you're living in Canada or America and you make more than $20,000 a year, you're already in the 1% of planet Earth.
Yeah.
So you're on your way. You have a head start over most of the world if you're living in Western developed civilization.
And so much is taken for granted over here. There's so many self-help gurus that are professing that, oh, just do this, oh, do that, maybe do this. And it's like, you can just see it now, especially in the lens of 2019, the amount of privilege that happens in North American societies. You have 360 million people that really just don't get it, and they think they get it, and they're arrogant about how much they think they get it. And that is their sin, that they're so woke to all of the issues of the world, and they hop on their phone and they do their 15-minute meditation, and then they go out and they jazzercise or whatever the heck it is that they do. And
virtue signaling.
Exactly. And it just doesn't actually make the world a better place. Like,
Right.
It does not take much effort to build a well in Africa, but the amount of effort that I see being put into shaming people for not being woke and talking about how woke people are on Twitter with a just complete blatant disregard to the privilege that they're utilizing and abusing. The diets of avocados that cost thousands of liters of gas to get across the world from a third world country that used to buy avocados, but now the price of avocados is 10 times increased, and their staple has been taken from them because of desire to be vegan or vegetarian, and avocados are cool and trending.
Let's be real, avocados are delicious.
I've never eaten an avocado.
I like me some guacamole. It's good for my ketogenic diet, though, so that's why I like it. I think that's a good spot.
I don't mean you need to stop eating avocados.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but I think that's a good place to take a quick break. And then afterwards, we'll run through the rest of this little section. Do. Welcome back. So, naturally, after Directive 1089 on
10-289.
10-289, Dagny reads the newspaper after waking up in her office and immediately throws it in Jim's face, walks out, quits, refuses to work, because obviously she's not a commie.
Yeah, this is the last straw for Dagny. And let's just take a deep breath now that we're back from the break. That was huge, and that was just one of 5 chapters in this part, and it required a lot of analysis, in my opinion, because I think that it really sets the stage for what's going to happen in the rest of the book.
Absolutely. This was a big turning point.
But yes, like you said, Dagny Taggart, our female protagonist, our heroine of this book, is done. Finally, she's been broke, and she quits, and she runs away to her cottage in the Berkshires. Is it in the Berkshires?
I think so.
Berkshire?
That sounds right.
So Dagny runs away at this point. It's the last straw, and she speaks with Hank Reardon before she goes, but he's got to deal with the gift certificate situation because he's a leader of industry and they want his medal, right?
Yes.
So she, for the month of May, is really just hiding, and we don't hear too much about her for the next chapter or so, because we shift over to Reardon's perspective and we talk about what Dr. Ferris and the communists do to get this gift certificate, this voluntary submission of patent over to the government. What did you think about that whole dynamic?
I didn't think he was gonna give in, honestly. I didn't think the threat that they had was gonna work. I thought he was stronger than that.
I wasn't surprised, because in earlier parts with the conversations he had with Francisco d'Anconia, he realizes that he's dug his own grave. He is in a marriage that is awful, and he feels guilty for being rich and productive because the society around him has said that he's a bad man who doesn't care about people, but he's never been unfair to people. He's made deals and arrangements that have benefited both parties and created things that have put him in a place of value, high value to the economy. And his wife is this awful socialite woman who really absorbed the communist morals and ideals, and
that's
makes
a big
him
factor
suffer.
too. That's a big factor too, because he finally works up the courage to call up his lawyer and ask for a divorce.
Yeah, so the fallout of this is that he accepts that he is going to live life by his own standards. But up until this point, he was hiding the fact that he was in love with Dagny Taggart and absolutely head over heels. Like, this was his queen. And this was the first time probably in his life that he understood what love meant and what marriage could look like and how great life could be with someone who was as valuable as himself. But he's gone about it the wrong way, and he's felt shame and guilt and hidden this, and the government knows about it now because his wife has confided in the communist government as another means of having more power and influence and luxury and bourgeoisie lifestyle. She's run away to Florida to hide from the fallout of all of this.
Yeah,
and they're saying, look,
it goes back to that one line from the start of the book where Hank he made the bracelet, the first pouring of Reardon metal, gave it to Lillian, and there's a point where he's just thinking inside of his head, like, I didn't just make this for my wife, I made it for the symbol that is my wife. So it wasn't until he met Dagny that he realized that, the symbol that was his wife wasn't a representation of love or happiness or whatever other people have when they get married.
Yeah, he had really just married a woman of good standing in society, and it was of no benefit to him. He just did what he thought he was meant to do. And I think he lived his social life, like every aspect of his life outside of his production and his work, he just kind of lived it on autopilot and did what society at a subconscious level told him what to do. And these are the limiting beliefs and decisions that drive a lot of people in this world. They do what they think is expected of them. They never stop and ask themselves what they expect of themselves. To what standard do they wish to live? And how would they like the world to be? I think a lot of people are very quick to just follow the masses and go with common opinion, not because they agree with it, but because they've never really looked internally and asked themselves who they are, what they want, and what they believe, and never given themselves time and permission to say that's okay and that's right and that you can live that way. And Hank knows that he's going to suffer for it because they want to slut shame Dagny Taggart for being the mistress, and he won't have her take any amount of punishment for his own failure to live a proper valued life.
Yeah. And I just couldn't help thinking about it from Dagny's point of view, that if she knew, she would have been like, I don't care if they think I'm a slut. Come on, Hank, what did you do?
Well, exactly. And I think, first of all, his principles in this chapter are amazing. I think put in that position, I'd do the same thing. Absolutely. Yeah. There's no reason for her to suffer. And I think, secondly, is like outside of this whole book is, holy cow, what an intense like way to write a book, that these characters' interactions have so much depth and meaning and introspection and insight to the way the world and the mind works, that this is just like notably an impressive piece of work, that you could be able to think this much about this relationship that has been created as a piece of fiction from the mind of Ayn Rand to convey a point and a philosophy about what it means to live on this planet. Like, round of applause. I can't believe it.
I mean, it's a lot to read, but it's definitely worth it. It's a thick book.
Yeah, like talking about this book, it seems so intense, and when you look at it, it's 1,100 pages in font point 8, like Bible scripture, huge book, and you think, oh my god, this, like, I imagine listening to me rant and rave about this book, you must think this is such an intense commitment, but it's such a page turner, and you don't stop for 1 second and say this is too much or they're going way too deep with this. It's like, no, this is what books should be like. This is informative. This is another perspective. This is a real experience of what it means to think this way and be able to see how it falls out, and stop yourself, if you're doing and living in this way, from continuing on without actually observing your own actions. Like, this has been fascinating.
Yes, I agree.
And not for 1 second was it a pain. I don't think I've ever picked up a book and read 150 pages nonstop without the feeling of labor or requirement as this book. Like, it is just such an easy escape to get into this world that has been so meticulously built, and everything has been thought through, and I love it. It is one of the best books I've ever read.
Yeah, it's up there for sure. And we get to the point where the Science Institute is making Miracle Metal, the rebranded Reardon Metal, for the sake of the government. And we find another old character coming back, basically causing a terrorist attack.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed that chapter. I think you're talking about Ragnar Gould and his conversation with Hank Reardon, which was, again, like, whoa, didn't see that coming. And also, this is the perfect thing to happen. And I love how this character has been painted, because the conversation was just incredible.
Yeah, but before the conversation, there's a bombing at the factories that Oren Boyle had set up, I think, or Wesley Mooch had helped him set up.
And he's done this for months in advance. He's planned to produce Miracle Metal, and he's built the factories, and he's just waited for the drop of the hat.
And there's an announcement over the radio at the factory saying, "Hey, get out, 'cause this place ain't gonna be here for very much longer." So they're all like, "Okay, Ragnar the pirate's coming for us." They all escape. No one dies. No fatalities or injuries. But every bit of the factory is just razed to the ground.
And it's been a while since we saw the pirate show up, because in the past he's just been sinking ships of relief. He's been sinking humanitarian relief vessels that are going to Europe from America and vice versa, and stealing their goods. And now he's actually mainland United States destroying factories, attempting to produce Hank Reardon's metal that has been consumed by the government and is now branded Miracle Metal. And after that, in the eve of that, he actually confronts and talks with Hank, and has another fantastic conversation. Like, they're like in the top 10 conversations of this book, this one was one of the most interesting.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Ragnar's dynamic.
You want to explain to the viewers at home just how methodical this pirate really is?
Well, starts off just following Hank, going for a walk, and he finds himself getting followed by Ragnar, and he just gives him a paper bag and said, "Hey, this is your payment. This isn't my money. This isn't their money. This is your money. There's more of that where it came from." And then he opens up the bag, sees a brick of solid gold in it. And And he's just like, "Who are you?" And he's just like, "You know who I am. I'm the guy that's looking out for you." And discloses that he is Ragnar Danaskjold. And they talk about the one character that he detests the most. And we talked about this in our last conversation, where I'm pretty sure I put it in the title or the description, like what happens when there's too many Robin Hoods. And Ragnar just comes out and says, "Hey, I'm the anti-Robin Hood. That's the one memory in humanity that I want to squash out for good is Robin Hood."
And let me be clear, because it's not the Robin Hood that, if you actually read the story, you'd know and respect. It's the memory of Robin Hood that's been created, which is he steals from the rich and gives to the poor, not mentioning that Robin Hood steals that which was stolen from the poor by the rich, from the rich to return to the poor, which is the full philosophy of Robin Hood. Not that the rich have money and they need to give it to the poor, but that the rich have taken.
He was fighting up against the same authoritarian state that Ragnar and Francisco and John Galt are fighting up against.
Exactly. And so what Ragnar says is, when the police stop using the name of law, it is pirates like myself that must become the police. And never in my 12 years have I sunk a private ship, have I sunk a military ship. The only ships I've sank were those that were sent under the guise of humanitarian relief. And the things that were shipped on those ships came directly from you, Hank Reardon, and men like you, your income tax and your profits, that which you have been robbed of has been sent. And I have a bank in the gold standard for all of that which has been taken from you and many men like you, because while this world burns, I am planning for the world that comes out of the fire, and I need brilliant minds to rebuild it, and they need every chance and opportunity they can, and that is why I have your money in my bank, and here is just a hint of the gold standard that I have protected for you. And he goes off for a few pages explaining meticulously these details.
Yeah, I really like that the one factor that he takes into account are his taxes. So Ragnar comes in as the ultimate libertarian hero, like taxation equals theft, and he explains exactly how taxation equals theft and how he's going to get his money back to him. Like these taxes that you've been paying, they're not part of any just law. You're going to get them back, don't worry. I'm your ally here if you like it or not.
And it puts me in a weird place because, again, I'm 25 years old and I'm definitely a fan of capitalism, but I'm also definitely a fan of taxes. And it makes me wonder where that line needs to be drawn and how you can get to a place where a government can regulate taxation of production and make the world a better place and not impose on the people that are making the money to make the world a better place. And it's a very hard distinction to make because, again, money isn't real. And like Ragnar talks about, it's not even backed by gold anymore. It's just numbers on a screen. And it's what stops people from getting material. And we have such an abundance of material and resources that the only thing stopping us from producing everything the world needs is money and the distribution of it. And I have definitely not fleshed out my belief of a perfect system that would allow everyone to produce and compete and make the world a better place. But Ragnar is completely against taxation of any form, it sounds like. And I know that's not the place that I'd land.
Yeah, like we always say, a mean between the two. A mixed economy. Like, we don't want socialism or communism. We don't want crony capitalism. We want something that utilizes the best points between each of them. Like, we're not going to have a world without taxes. We need roads.
Roads need to be fixed.
Yeah.
Government workers need to fix roads. Government workers need to be paid taxes. We can't privatize everything. Or is that the argument? Is that the argument, that we privatize everything? And now there's a toll on every road.
It's an argument that I've heard before, realistically put forth, but I'm with you. I don't think it's the final answer. I think it's the direction we need to go, but I don't think it's the final solution.
Because I definitely don't support private military organizations
Yeah, that's scary.
operating solely for profit. Like there's gotta be a middle way. But let's dive deep into the last couple chapters here because it moves pretty quickly and we see the catastrophes that end up happening.
Oh yes, there's a train goes off the rails or has a minor crash or something like that.
Two things.
The
So we
engine gets
have
messed up.
a Californian senator going on a public speaking tour.
Yeah,
So this is
Kip Chalmers is on this train.
and they've been approved for the first time since the John Galt line to go at 100 miles an hour, which is maximum efficiency, but the rail system doesn't keep up, and the engine ends up getting thrown off somewhere in Wisconsin, and
Right.
Kip Chalmers, the man of clout, demands no matter what that his train keeps moving because he has a date and a time to reach a place, and there's a tunnel, a 10-mile tunnel he needs to get through, and there's no more diesel burning engines in the system to support him, which is what is required to get through this tunnel. And the government passes the buck off to the smallest man capable of issuing the order to put a coal burning engine on the front of this train, which cannot get through this tunnel. The grade is too steep, and the threat of death is imminent.
Not to mention that it'll fill the entire tunnel full of burnt coal, which wouldn't happen with a steam engine. People are gonna have some trouble breathing in there.
And so we run through the actions of something happening that shouldn't have happened, but because there is a government agent with clout demanding it happens in a communist society where no one wants to take the blame and be the reason that he doesn't get to his destination, they pass it off and they pass it off and they put the wrong engine on.
I had one note written down for this part, and it was just like a quote, "Not my problem," uttered by literally every single person that this news reaches.
And then just following orders, and no one informs the army that the train got stuck in the tunnel and the army train is going into that tunnel with a diesel engine and thousands of tons of explosives.
Because nobody would stand up and say the one thing that they all knew was right, that like, hey, you're in danger if you do this. And they all knew
what you're asking for can't be done. We don't have the means to do it. You'll have to wait.
Yeah, and Kip calls Jim. Jim calls the acting vice president. The acting vice president just writes a little note saying, hey, get this done. Nobody knows the actual specific issue, and everybody wants it done. And nobody realizes that it can't be done without a horrible catastrophe.
Worse yet, I think they all realize it will result in this, but that there's so much pull that they'll be fired if he doesn't get to his destination.
Yeah, which leads to half of them quitting or running away or just doing their
no
best
one
to
wants
shirk
to.
all responsibility.
And then this event, of course, pulls Dagny back into the swing of things. After a month of hiding in her cottage, she hears about this on the radio and she just runs back to try and fix the rail system that has collapsed into communist hands. And she finds out that her scientist has quit on her and she needs to check on the railroads, and she's taking a train to get across the country to check on the rails and to check on the engine, and the train gets abandoned, and now she's got to try and organize a new crew to run this train. And then she goes and she hops on a plane to try and get to Utah to meet with her scientist that is working on this static electric engine that will revolutionize the world, in spite of the fact that there's no point for her to do anything because it's a communist nation and you can't invent new things and you can't make the train better because that would go against everything that's been established. She refuses to follow these new laws because she just needs to be productive. It's the only thing inside her that makes life worth living, and she refuses to stop.
Yeah. And the train that gets stopped there, she finds there's a tramp that tried to jump onto the train, a drifter, and she discovers him as the conductor is basically trying to murder the guy, throw him off a moving train, because that's
In
what,
the middle of nowhere.
yeah, because that's what this communist regime has done to people. It's supposed to bring in an age of love, but really it's just an age of everybody feeling sick at the sight of anybody else who's not producing their own means.
Yeah, and we have probably the most intense conversation between Dagny and this tramp that I read in the book. And it's a pretty tough competition because all these conversations are really good, but this man worked at the 20th Century Motor Company, the company that was the first in the nation to enact a new system of employment where they shifted from employment to a state of family where they cared about brotherly love and enforced a communist agenda. And he completely explains in very plain terms exactly what happened to the human mentality in the 4 years it took to destroy that company and all the towns surrounding it. And our final analogy or origin story, I should say, to John Galt and who he is.
Yeah. And this isn't like a myth. This is an actual story that he told him. That the tramp told Dagny. This actually happened at the 20th Century Motor Company.
And it took me by surprise, and I got chills up my whole body because, of course, on the back of the book, it's talking about the man who pledges to stop the motor of the world. And it's never referenced until this point that this man who pledges to stop the motor of the world existed. His name was John Galt, and he left the first day the communist agenda was put into place at the 20th Century Motor Company.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
I don't want to spoil too much of the dialogue because it was, or the monologue, tramp, because it was just so eloquent and so intense that I'll leave that nugget of gold for the reader. And please buy this book on Amazon. Affiliate link in the description. This is, bar none, the best book I've read in my life.
I just want to bring up one more point. Roll back to chapter 8 a little bit, entitled By Our Love, which kind of insinuates that, like, this is the point where Dagny's still in her cabin, doing some renovating, because if she was just doing nothing, she'd be going stir crazy. And she's basically expecting a visit from Hank, and by the name of the chapter, I was too. I was like, okay, this is when Hank is going to show up and progress the story a little bit, but it wasn't Hank at all. It was Francisco that shows up, and she doesn't even know how he found her. Accuses Eddie of selling her out, and he's like, nah, it wasn't Eddie. I have my own ways. Just the chapter name, By Our Love, changed its meaning by the end of the chapter. It wasn't related to Hank and Dagny. It was like Francisco's love and Dagny's love, not for each other, but for the future, and the future that they want to create, or their own personal values, I guess. Like realizing their own love for either the Taggart Transcontinental and needing to go back, or I don't know. That's just what I got from it.
No, absolutely. Like that's just it. Their belief that the world had in its capacity to create a man who was worth producing great innovations for. And that was the ideal that Francisco and Dagny had as children, thinking that they could create for a world that deserved to be created for. And this was the confession time for Francisco to say that he saw this world of communism coming, and instead of doing what he set out to do, which was to make the Danconia Copper Company the most successful it had ever been in all the generations it had been passed on, and he realized that this world didn't deserve it, and that he wasn't able to love that man because he didn't believe that man existed anymore.
Yes.
And this is the metaphorical return of the operator in charge of the Danconia company, his ancestor who returned to Spain to find his wife still waiting for him. But Dagny no longer waited for Francisco. She gave up on the idea of Francisco long ago because she just cannot stop being the best version of herself in spite of being driven by slave drivers. She still wants to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
But Francisco has this overarching battle plan of destroying the world so that he can rebuild it afterwards, instead of pushing through in the way Dagny is to try and make the world a better place now without damning the entire contents of it. It was intense. Again, we've got two seriously well-established individuals with belief systems that are trying their best to do what they can.
Yeah. And the way that Dagny speaks about the destroyer in these chapters, it's like she's really struggling to figure out what form this destroyer that she's envisioned takes.
And we're getting so close to it too, discovering what's really going on. And there's a few pieces in all these chapters that I've left out intentionally because there is such an interesting storyline here. The $ cigarettes and the organization that plans on making a better tomorrow, that it you know it's there and it's never talked about. Yeah. You know that there's a group of individuals pushing forward underground to make a capitalistic society succeed again, but they don't talk about it. And they like, even when you find an agent of them, he doesn't spill the beans. Dagny learns nothing about them. But at the end of this part, we end with the most intense plane chase. Like, hello.
Yeah. Just out of nowhere, she jumps in a plane and starts. She heads towards Utah first to meet up with Quentin. But then when she gets there, finds out that he's not there anymore. So she's got to get back in her plane and keep going.
And I won't even spill any more details. I think you've been obscure in a good way there. But yeah, it's this crazy plane chase into the unknown world, into a part of the Colorado Rocky Mountains that shouldn't be flown over and shouldn't be flown into. And again, there's this subplot of Atlantis that sneaks in maybe 10 sentences up to this point. In 640 pages, they couldn't even put together a paragraph referencing it, but you know it's there, and you wonder what it is.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's so poetic. And it's a decent romance novel, too. Like, it's really good. Has so many aspects.
I'm so excited for the next part of this book. It has been such an experience talking about this with you and unpacking it and reading it. And I just can't wait till next time that we're talking about part 3, because we're into it now. And there's still, 430 pages left in this book. And I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's a long one, but the length of the book is never
it's never criteria for question.
It's never like a negative factor. It's just it's a long book. There's lots of good long books.
It's a massive book.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too, like, it's not just a long book, it's a really small font. And if you look at books today, and like, I need to get the word count on this book and compare it to books that have come out that are 200 pages long, because this book just outstrips them, and it's never an issue. It's like, oh, it's 1,070 pages. No biggie. It's amazing. It's gold, and every page is worth reading.
Yeah. You just gotta love it when you find a book like that. And you can never stop talking about it, too. It's like, oh, I found this piece of pure gold in the world. Why isn't anybody else talking about this? But it turns out that they are talking.
And you can't explain it to anyone.
Turns out that they're just done talking about it, the ones who've already experienced it. So you got to bring it to the newer generation.
Yeah, like, everyone needs to read this book. It is It is so interesting. If you think you have an opinion about communism or capitalism, and you haven't read a fiction book that's 1,100 pages long
Yeah.
that shares with you the perspective of an author who has opinions that have been thought thoroughly and
Yes.
researched and disseminates in a beautiful tale her opinion.
Yes. I would hesitate to say that everybody should read this book, but if you're interested in politics, you have to read this book. That's what I would say.
If you're not interested in politics, you should read this
might
book.
get you interested into it.
If you aren't interested in politics, if you don't know about anything, if you're one of those people that says, "Oh, I don't get involved in politics," maybe read a fiction book that shows just how bad it gets when an entire nation does what they think they're supposed to do and doesn't get involved in politics.
Yeah, and always keep in mind the present day politics when you're reading a book like this and make the comparisons.
And don't watch the movie. Oh, please don't watch the movie.
Okay, I won't. But until next time, may the force be with you.
And may the force be equal to mass times acceleration.